It's December 2014, and the air is buzzing with holiday cheer. The fireplace burns brightly, flames lick at the stockings that hang a bit too low. Cookies turn black as the oven timer goes off inside of an empty kitchen. Hallmark movies play on an endless loop, telling tantamount tales of love, death, and Santa. For a few short weeks, all is good. However, as the days flick by and ABC Family airs its 34th viewing of the hit cult classic Jack Frost, years may vary, you begin to grow bored. Jolly old St. Nick just isn't enough to satiate your entertainment famine. So, after gathering your 2 closest friends and obtaining parental consent, you decide to go see a real movie. Upon being graced with your grandparents' gifted pocket change, you're able to scrounge up enough for a single movie ticket. You spend minutes Googling the movies available to you, and upon seeing the selection, you know you're in for a treat. Theaters near you are screening The Hobbit, The Battle of the 5 Armies, the conclusion to an epic trilogy, the final piece of a puzzle, and the last time you'll ever visit Middle-earth again. You continue to scroll, reaching Night at the Museum, Secret of the Tomb, a movie 5 years in the making, a classic tale of history, and a quest to retrieve a magic glowing object. Venturing further down, you find an adaptation of a classic, Disney's Into the Woods, a work of art featuring phenomenal voice acting, fantasy creatures, and a world full of magic and wonder. Finally, your eyes land on the adorable Song of the Sea, a beautifully animated feature with unforgettable style and a story unique to its source. How could you possibly make a decision? Eventually, after much debate, you pick one and go on your adventure. It's fantastic. Your love of movies only grows stronger as you enter the new year. 2015 brings promise of new beginnings and new cinematic journeys you'll be sure to love. January approaches, and you can't wait to see what's next. At the end of January, a new feature catches your eye. It's a movie that promises to combine the greatest feats of every movie you've ever seen so far. It's one with an epic battle, a quest to retrieve a glowing object, a world full of fantasy creatures and magic, a beautiful animated adaptation so grand Shakespeare himself would shed a tear at its creation. And it's a musical. You love the creativity and the amount of effort it takes to create movies like these. So, you decide to see it. The one movie that's a culmination of everything you could have asked for from a film. Using the leftover Christmas cash you haven't spent on Littlest Pet Shops and Star Wars action figures, you shell out a single ticket for George Lucas's original film, Strange Magic, and it was shit. The movie Strange Magic takes place in a world where romance is magically fabricated and love potions are the name of the game. In this world, there lies a pint-sized kingdom appropriately named the Fairy Kingdom. Marianne is the eldest princess of the Fairy Kingdom, and is betrothed to and in love with Roland, a self-centered moth whose one and only love is the promised army he'll receive upon marrying the throne. When Marianne discovers Roland is cheating, she immediately rejects all notions of love and enters her emo phase in a flurry of dark clothing, combat training through osmosis, and edgy girl boss music that would make Kelly Clarkson herself cry. Then we meet Gnome Mario Lopez, also known as Sunny, the token non-white character with a massive crush on Marianne's little sister. Dawn, who's so boy-obsessed it's borderline concerning, is the girl of Sunny's dreams, but to his dismay, Dawn doesn't feel the same. So, with a little prodding from Roland, Sunny decides that in order to get the girl of his dreams, he must use a love potion. The problem is, love potions can only be made by the Sugar Plum Fairy, who's currently a prisoner in the Bog King's castle. So, Sunny takes it upon himself to sneak into the Dark Forest and convince the Sugar Plum captive to concoct a date rape drug that will solve all of his problems. While in the Bog King's domain, we meet the man in myth himself. We learn that he too shares Marianne's view on love. With his own tragic backstory, he's adamant on keeping a secret. Upon realizing Sunny's successfully stolen a love potion, the Bog King sends his little gobbies into the Fairy Kingdom, where, immediately after the love potion hits Dawn in the face, she's kidnapped and taken into the Dark Forest. Because he is the first person she sees after being forced into submission, the Bog King is who Dawn falls in love with. Bog hates it. Sunny, Roland, and Marianne separately embark on their quest to save Dawn. Marianne and the Bog King get into a tussle, simultaneously performing their own renditions of super tough, smart-aleck rebel songs about how much love sucks, and how tough and independent they are, and how they are awesome and not like other girls, and are really smart and cool and sexy all around. Realizing they have a lot in common, Marianne starts falling for the villain, as does he for her. After requesting her assistance, the Sugar Plum Fairy gives the antidote to Bog and Marianne through a riddle, which can be easily answered by anyone with half a brain cell and the ability to breathe air. It's love. The answer to the riddle was love. Anyway, as it turns out, love potions don't work on people who are already in love, which is why the Bog King's tragic past is so tragic. He tried to drug a woman who was already in love, this whole time thinking the potion failed because he was just so ugly and unlovable that no one could ever possibly want him, even with the use of magic. Because he was so disgusting and putrid in the eyes of women, he never wanted anyone to be drugged and forced into entrapment ever again, so he locked the Sugar Plum Fairy away for all eternity. Once they solve the riddle, Dawn is set free by realizing she actually does love Sunny, the man who tried to enslave her. The Bog King sacrifices himself after Roland's forces attack. He dies for 2.5 seconds, comes back to life, and he and Marianne sing about how love maybe isn't that bad after all. Sunny gets the girl, Roland gets the boot, everyone is happy. Everyone except me. This movie was trash. Despite my overwhelmingly negative opinion of this film, there are little details in this movie that did make me smile while watching. The fact that the fairies ride on squirrels reminded me of Tinker Bell, a fairy movie that actually deserves to be watched. The Bog King has a line of whispering mushrooms sprouting from the brush to tell him any news that comes from the edge of the woods. The character designs are actually unique in this movie, and the backgrounds are gorgeous as well. The lighting and the ambience really did give me a magical feel, especially in the Bog Kingdom. There's this little rat creature who is a complete and utter menace in Sunny's journey to drug the princess, and he is my absolute favorite addition to this movie. He's the cutest creature in existence. It can actually provide some sort of comedic relief sometimes. If we ignore his backstory entirely, Bog is actually a pretty cool character. Instead of using Dawn's potion infatuation with him to his advantage, Bog actively tries to break her out of it. He claims it's because he's so annoyed by her that he wants to get her out of his life at once, but really we know he's growing a soft spot for the playful princess. If this movie were framed differently, which I'll get into that in a bit, I would have loved to see Bog as our snarky tyrant protagonist rather than feisty Marianne. There's also this joke near the end of the movie that actually made me laugh, and I thought was pretty cute. While Dawn's under the love potion spell, she insists on referring to the king as Boggy Woggy. Bog incessantly corrects her up until the end where this happens.
Please don't sing.
You know, Bog.
Boggy.
Changes of heart like that really make me smile. At an hour and 12 minutes in, Bog and Marianne sing a duet imaginatively called Strange Magic, which is about the only song in the movie that was semi-impactful for me. It fits the vibe of the scene and shows how the two characters are coming together in a way that takes a break from the onslaught of pop songs that filled the movie for the last hour. Because yes, as I said in the intro, this is a musical. When I first watched this movie a few years ago, I think the most remarkable part of it for me was the fact that this kids' movie featured true enemies to lovers. I don't know how common this occurrence was back then, especially since I wasn't as well versed in movie tropes during this era. The only enemies to lovers I knew of at the time were Chad and Sunny from Sunny with a Chance. So, for me, seeing someone who was supposed to represent true evil end up with our main protagonist was mind-blowing. Enemies to lovers is much more prominent today, to a point where I'm even tired of its existence entirely. But when I saw this relationship develop way back when, I was enthralled. That is one thing about this movie I specifically remember praising in the onslaught of trash I had sat through prior. Oh, and one last thing. This line delivery was so bad, it made me laugh.
Dawn, do you think that Roland loves me as much as I love him?
Not really a positive, but I had to fit it in somewhere. Positives aside, let's get into the gritty details as to why I disliked this movie. The very last sequence in the movie featured a kaleidoscope scene, and it was absolutely horrid and didn't deserve to be included in the cut at all. Also, the fact that Lucas chose to give Marianne a complete emo transformation, but only forced her to sing Kelly Clarkson songs is a disgrace to her entire character. Imagine Marianne singing Helena by My Chemical Romance when she found out Roland was cheating on her. At the ball, when her father tries to advocate for Roland's attempt to get her back, they could have bought the rights to Ignorance by Paramore and made a bigger impact character-wise than any other song in this movie. I mean, honestly, writing their own original pieces would have had a bigger impact overall than any cover song could. It also would have avoided years worth of song seeking since the music would have been pre-composed before production even began. But, you know, why put effort into a movie meant to be Star Wars for girls when you could just not? I think the lack of original music also contributed to the lack of comprehension viewers get in understanding these characters. We don't know who Marianne truly is because she's too busy singing overplayed pop songs that fit the situation rather than songs that fit the character. Even if they didn't want to write original music, they could have been far more creative during the song selection process. Imagine each main character being assigned a genre of music to which they adhered to. Dawn would sing the indie pop music that was popular at the time, Bog would strictly belt out Metallica songs and the like, while Roland would sing country tunes and Marianne would be fixed on pop-punk beats. That would give the characters way more personality than singing from the top charts lists every go-around. There are some musical numbers that just straight up aren't needed. Sunny sings "Don't Worry About a Thing" to cheer Dawn up over a situation that didn't need to be pummeled into the viewer's mind. If it was an attempt to show Sunny's relationship with Dawn and how much he cares for her, they could have done a much better job doing so through dialogue alone, or by maybe using original music. The entire point of a musical is to have the characters say through lyrics things that they are unable to say themselves. Sunny sings the song at a time that is not relevant to the plot whatsoever. The space could have been better utilized to showcase Sunny's traits or maybe give Dawn more personality. If the message a character is trying to convey can easily be said through dialogue alone, then a song isn't needed. This song isn't needed. And don't even get me started on the fact that this movie felt it necessary to include an entire musical ensemble of Bog singing about how evil he is.
Yes, I'm evil. So don't you mess around with me.
I know that this movie was made for 12-year-olds, but 12-year-olds aren't stupid. They will be able to tell that your characters are evil if you make them evil. They do not need a whole song about it. Both kings in this movie are undeniably racist, which, although parallels the majority of rulers in the real world, probably shouldn't be included as a haha funny in a kids movie.
Well, boys, I've learned a valuable lesson. Never judge something, or someone, by how it, or he, or she looks. Oh, an elf. Wait.
Besides, the Fairy King could have been cut entirely from the movie and it would have made no difference. He was simply there to tell Marianne to go look after her sister, a feat she was already accomplishing due to her own free will. I hated that as soon as Marianne and Bog started to develop feelings for each other, Roland came rushing in to attack and Bog wouldn't hear Marianne out at all. I get that he has trauma or whatever, but miscommunication is my least favorite plot device in existence. It's lazy and frustrating and super unfulfilling and should be banned from pieces of media everywhere. And the idea that love potions are a good contribution to this society probably shouldn't be promoted either, but again, I'll get into that later. During the What Went Right section of this video, I mentioned how the Strange Magic Love sequence was the only song that actually fit the vibe of the movie, and that was definitely a positive. When I showed this movie to my boyfriend to get even more analysis from the eyes of a new person, he pointed out something that blew my mind. This whole time, the movie builds Marianne and Bog up to be these flawed characters who need help learning to trust again. Marianne is supposed to be this strong, independent fairy who knows how to fend for herself. However, when the sequence occurs, all of this characterization is thrown out the window. Marianne suddenly needs help doing everything in the dark forest. She slips and falls and needs Bog to help her up. She can't make it through the thick brambles of the woods and needs Bog's guidance to make it through safely. This wouldn't be a bad thing if Bog also needed the help of Marianne to make his way through the path. They are both depicted as flawed beings who have to learn that trusting someone is okay. This isn't shown at all in this scene because Marianne is the only character here who needs that help. And don't get me wrong, I completely understand that this is Bog's domain. He knows the dark forest like the back of his hand and probably wouldn't require much help. My main gripe is in the fact that there was no attempt to show Bog vulnerable like there was with Marianne. Sure, Bog takes on the role of protector, a role that he's never taken on before. However, when the movie chooses to show this by sacrificing Marianne's entire character, it's a bit off. I think what they were trying to go for in this scene is the idea that love is new for both of them, and it's going to be clumsy at the start. I just think there are better ways to execute this idea rather than reverting Marianne back to who she was at the beginning of this story. Sunny had too much screen time. A large portion of the movie was spent following the elf around while he fumbled through the dark forest. It was entertaining, sure, but I can't help but feel like this time could have been spent developing the characters more. Dawn was basically a prop the entire time, going wherever the plot needed her to be without any will of her own. I would have loved to see her character developed more, other than the fact that she's boy crazy and unaware of her surroundings. What this movie didn't account for was that the actions of Sunny made him even worse than the intended villain, Bog. It is my belief that Sunny is the true villain of this story. None of the problems that arise in the Fairy Kingdom would have happened had Sunny stayed in his lane and been a good friend to Dawn. Never once does he indicate to Dawn that he has feelings for her. In fact, Sunny actively helps Dawn find relationships with other men. He never once communicates to her that he likes her and instead resorts to tricking her into romance so he can be happy. He's in love with Dawn and has been for a very long time, I get it. But being in love with someone does not give you the right to use a brainwashing juice so you can force the girl of your dreams into believing that she loves you. Sunny's selfish act is what caused the Bog Kingdom to attack in the first place. Had Sunny not breached the unspoken oath and sought out the Sugar Plum Fairy, Dawn would have never been kidnapped and forced to fall in love with Bog. And in the end, Sunny's rewarded for it all. Sunny and Dawn end up together, even though he was actively trying to impede upon Dawn's free will. Sunny is never punished for his attempts at making Dawn love him, besides the fact that the potion backfired onto Bog. Even then, it was seen as an annoyance rather than something wrong. The whole plot deemed the concept of the love potion as sacred because, as in George Lucas's own words, everybody is deserving of love. My issue with this message is that the plot is acting as though the potions are the only way to obtain true love in this world. As evidence of Bog's backstory, true love exists organically already. The moral of the story isn't that true love is earned or true love takes effort, it's that love is deserved and love is owed. True love and happiness really is not with the pretty boy, Lucas said. Which is true. Sometimes the most handsome chap isn't actually the most admirable companion on the roster. But instead of showing kids that true love is with someone who respects you and your decisions, he shows that someone who is desperate enough to seek magic out to force your hand is worthy of your love. Love is not owed to anybody. No one is a prize to be won. You can kick and scream as much as you want, but at the end of the day, love is a mutual understanding between parties. Dawn chose to love Sunny in the end, but for what reason? If my best friend tried to coerce me into loving them, I don't think that's something I could forgive or look past. Dawn had no reason to love Sunny after all he's done. Forgiveness is important, sure, but never once did they have the conversation discussing Sunny's actions and how they affected Dawn. There was no room for an apology to be given. Dawn just magically forgets everything he's done and takes him on as her new lover. Not a great message. When the canonical villain of the story is a man who actively tries to free Dawn from the binding of the love potion, and one of the main protagonists is a guy who tries to put her in that state to begin with, it presents as a backwards take on modern heroism in a way that is nothing but negative. Sunny deserved the worst, and I stand by that fully. This project was created by Star Wars' genius George Lucas through his Lucasfilm studio, and can I just say, whatever talent Mr. Lucas had in writing the 80s hit film series went out the window for this one. I just want to make it clear that this movie was indeed a musical, and it was a slog and a half to get through. It wasn't because of the overused plot devices, or the absurdly long time it took to get to the central conflict, or the fact that the answer to the very sacred riddle was love and that made me want to blow my brains out. No, none of this is what made this movie absolutely insufferable for me. It was the fact that in the hour and 39-minute runtime this movie had, the characters sang 22 times. And those are just the instances of singing that I counted as separate. There were more instances where characters would continue a song they started 30 seconds prior, and I didn't include those in the count for the sake of being fair. Now don't get me wrong, the official soundtrack of the movie only has 13 cover songs listed on record, which is still a huge number compared to the average of 6 that Disney has for their typical movies. But as you watch, you can see that these 13 songs take up about 70% of this movie. And that stat didn't come from the depths of my ass either. Mr. George Lucas Films said as much himself.
Originally, I wanted it all to be music, like an opera, no talking. And when we got to that phase, everybody sort of beat on me really hard and said that's not going to work. I'd say 70% of it is music.
So yeah, as someone who despises all musicals that don't have original songs, for me, this movie was the worst thing that happened in the entertainment industry besides Moonfall failing at the box office. In crafting this movie, Lucas claimed that
the driving force was, can the lyrics tell the story?
You would think if Star Wars Man wanted to tell an original story for girls full of musical numbers that convey a story in a unique and inspiring way, the most obvious way to achieve this would be to say, I don't know, maybe write your own lyrics? There's nothing different or inspiring about telling a tale from Shakespearean times while using an ensemble of overplayed pop songs to convey a message of, hey, ugly guys deserve love too, you know? And yes, that is exactly the message Filmy wanted to convey with this one. In reference to an interviewer stating what a remarkable feat it was to have two guys who aren't conventionally attractive get a girl who was so feminine and beautiful, Lucas says this.
You know, what about us guys? Are we getting kicked out? It's only going to be the ugly ones that get to be the heroes, and not the handsome ones.
And then he talks about how he came up with this revolutionary concept. Here's the full quote from Collider.com.
It was simply a matter of, the story is about the difference between infatuation and real love. And real love is on the inside. It's somebody you have a common ground with. You share the same values, you share the same interests, you share the same humor. You share all those things that will last you the rest of your life. What the person looks like will not, and that's the point. If you fall in love with a boy band, that's not going to last. If you fall in love with a football star, that's not going to last. It's for young kids to say, hey, let's just get beyond the cover of the book. And again, it's a story that's been told over and over again. In that case, it's much more like Star Wars. Instead of mythology, it's based on fairy tales, whether it's as simple as the Ugly Duckling. But it's really something that says, hey, kids need to be told this every generation so that they understand that that's really the way it works. And with a little slight 60s, 70s twist, which is, true love and happiness really is not with the pretty boy. Finally, I'm free.
So Lucas decided he was going to be the one to rehash this revolutionary concept that ugly guys deserve hot girls for this generation. It's not like any other movie released around this time did the exact same thing but way better or anything. It's not like there's an entire trope dedicated to defining this not cliche movie device in the history of its conception. This message is a good one, don't get me wrong. I'm all for the not-so-attractive man getting the girl of his dreams because everyone is able to be loved, no matter what you look like. Where my problem lies is in the fact that Lucas hounds on the idea that his two most unassuming characters obtain love even though they're not pretty or handsome, as if that's the biggest thing that makes these characters undesirable. The fact of the matter is, these characters suck butt. The two characters he chose to make the least attractive among the bunch were also the ones who turned out to be raging assholes the entire time. We'll get into why a bit later, but trust me when I say, these characters aren't people little boys should look up to, nor be the ones that little girls fiend after. After hearing that description, I'd say this vague adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream was a movie made on a whim, a mere ploy to make a quick buck off of the people who would take their kids to see literal trailer trash and be on their way. But no, this is not the case at all. Let's play a game. I'm going to give you 3 options, and I want you to choose one based on how long you think it took for this movie to be made. Don't go too crazy, it's not that bad. But it still took an entire 10 years for this movie to be made. 10! It was mere jizz in the mind of Daddy Lucasfilms all the way back in 2004. This movie had been in the works since I was 3 years old. I was mere jizz 3 years prior. How on earth could a movie this bad take 10 years to develop? Well, we can ask Georgie himself. From the same interview, he says, quote,
So the first 10 years were spent developing the characters and trying to get the animation to do what we actually wanted it to do and take it to the next step, and also trying to weave all this stuff together.
You know, maybe Lucas would have spent a lot less time and money on this film if he, for the love of God, just wrote his own songs. The amount of music that Lucas had to filter through during the decade he was working on this movie had to have been in the hundreds at least. New music was constantly being released, which just meant there was more content for George Youngus to consider while creating his art. The songs he did choose for the movie ended up contributing nothing to the characterization of the ones selected to sing them. Original songs would have made the creation process both cheaper and plot efficient in the long run. Maybe he wouldn't have to have spent 10 years on this work if he had more direction to begin with. But besides the music thing, I get it. Animation is one hell of a process, and it can take a long time to get things up and running until you're able to reach a point where it becomes something you're proud of. After all, this movie cost anywhere between $70 and $100 million to make. Surely the amount of time, money, and effort spent building this movie from the ground up was worth it in the end, right? Oh, maybe not. Yeah, see, George Lucas intended this one to be a, quote, Star Wars for girls, but really it was just a big gooby situation. No originality, no self-awareness, and no big plot to rival that of his biggest franchise yet. This movie was definitely not Lucas's best work, and that's disappointing to see. I love all things fantasy, and I only wish this movie could have been better. Actually... Now, I didn't want to unabashedly bash this movie without giving any methods of reconstruction. Giving criticism without fixes is counterproductive, especially when this movie had so much potential. It was wasted on a storyline that I personally wasn't in love with, and it's a shame that it was. The characters could have been interesting thematically speaking if they had been developed a little bit further, and the plot could have been tightened up morality-wise. Overall, there was a much more impactful way to deliver the message Lucas intended. So, with that being said, here's how I would fix George Lucas's strange magic. We'd begin the opening scene in the same style as the original. The scroll would unravel, showing the map of both kingdoms, both now named something more appropriate, like the Kingdom of Brina, a Gaelic word meaning fairyland, and the Woods of Ardeen, an Irish name meaning Great Forest. We zoom into a view of both kingdoms, except now, instead of just explaining the importance of the love potion in this universe, we also discover the story of how Bog came to have the Sugar Plum Fairy in his possession. Bog was in love with the fairy in Brina, but his love was unrequited. He sought the advice of the other fairies, and they told him about their sacred love potion, a commodity so valuable to the fairy kingdom they couldn't possibly operate without it. Taking their advice, Bog sought out the Sugar Plum Fairy, asked her to make a potion, and used it on his unsuspecting love. And it worked. The fairy was completely enchanted by Bog, enraptured by him. She stayed by his side at all times, at his beck and call, doting on him whenever she was able. It was everything Bog had ever asked for, but slowly, over time, Bog grew to hate it. He hated the constant attention, hated the singing, the hugging, and the repeated argument whenever he asked to be alone. If this was what love was, then he didn't want to partake in it ever again. No one should deal with the temptations of the love potion. So, he sent his lover away, captured the sugar plum fairy, banished her to the dungeons, and criminalized the use of love potions for all of the land. The Bog King now sits in his castle, guarding the sugar plum fairy, content with his ruining of love for all. We start the story and meet Marianne for the first time. She's in her room, staring at an old family photo pasted inside of a dusty diary her mother kept before she left. Her mother and father are still together here, holding a baby Dawn and a toy-sized Marianne. Marianne was old enough to remember her parents before the divorce, but through their split, she learned that love doesn't always last. There is no emo transformation or sword training montage. She's been dark since the split, learning the only way to get by is to look after herself. She doesn't believe in lasting love, nor does she believe that she needs it. She was meant to be alone, and that's the way she liked it. We look out the window and meet Dawn, still her same bubbly, love-obsessed self. Dawn was too little to remember the split, so it never truly hurt her. She hears stories now and again of her mother's adventures when she was around, but she never felt connected the way Marianne did. She smiles at Sunny, who's staring longingly at Dawn as she flies away to find her boyfriend. Dawn grew up on tales of love potions and real magic. She's in love with the idea of love and wants to find it for herself. Instead of Marianne being engaged to Roland in this version, it's Dawn, who is completely infatuated with him. As Dawn's looking for Roland to meet him for a date, she finds him kissing another fairy. This nearly breaks her. She runs to Marianne, sobbing over Roland and the way that he treated her. Marianne tells her not to beat herself up over the situation. Love isn't worth the heartache. Trusting love is the worst thing a fairy can do. Dawn considers her words, turning them over in her mind, and she eventually realizes she's right. Love isn't worth the heartache. Why experience the worst parts of love when she can experience all the best parts all of the time? She resolves to get a love potion to win Roland back for good. This time, he won't want to cheat on her. Marianne tries her best to talk her sister out of her plan, but she won't budge. She tries to tell her that although love doesn't last, she knows that the love potion has no chance of replicating the real thing. But her pleas fall on deaf ears. Dawn's going into Ardeen no matter what. So, Marianne goes with her to protect her little sister and perhaps try and convince her to turn around along the way. Dawn leaves a note for Sunny stating her departure, and they embark on their quest. Meanwhile, the Bog King has a surprise visitor. Roland stands before the king, distraught. He admits that he sent one of his minions to sneak into Castle Ardeen to ask the Sugar Plum Fairy to make a love potion for him. The fairy he was caught cheating with before was under a spell. It cost him the hand of the princess. It cost him the throne. Bog is furious. Instead of helping Roland, he throws him into the dungeons with the Sugar Plum Fairy, punishing him for his crimes. He cares not for the fairy under the duress of the love spell, but only for the insubordination from the adjacent kingdom. Marianne and Dawn make it to Ardeen and find their way to the Sugar Plum Fairy. Dawn succeeds in getting the potion, but just as she reaches for it, Bog enters the dungeon. Marianne fights Bog, desperate to protect her sister. In the midst of battle, Dawn takes the potion and tries to make a run for it, but Bog beats her to the door. They struggle, both trying to take the potion for themselves. The potion breaks open, spilling the dust all over Dawn. The first person she sees when she opens her eyes is Bog himself. She falls in love. Panicked, Bog locks both fairies in the dungeon. His defenses have been breached not once, but twice by residents of the fairy kingdom. First, a future royal broke his sacred law. Then the heiress to the throne tries to too. He's livid. He starts gathering his armies to begin an invasion of Brina. We cut to Sunny learning of Dawn's mission to retrieve the love potion. Distraught, he informs the fairy king, who begins to gather an army to go after his girls. Once alone, Sunny decides he too is going to seek out a love potion and use it on Dawn before Dawn can use hers on Roland. Sunny begins his trek through the woods. In the Dark Kingdom, Marianne tries to talk Dawn out of her spell, but it's no use. The Bog King asks the Sugar Plum Fairy for the cure, and she doesn't give him an anticlimactic riddle to solve. Instead, she just straight up tells him it's love. Real love, which Bog doesn't believe exists. When the Bog King returns to the dungeon, Marianne convinces him she knows how to obtain the antidote for the love potion. What she needs is back in her kingdom, and she needs to be let out to retrieve it. Eventually, Bog relents on the condition that he goes with her to ensure she doesn't try and escape. Marianne agrees, and together they venture into Brina. Bog learns of the place where Marianne grew up. He learns her favorite shops, her favorite restaurants, where she used to play with Dawn. She shows him places she and her mother used to hang out together, and describes the way her parents used to be. Bog asks her why she's so hung up on her parents. She guesses it's because it's the only time she's ever seen love up close. As they make their way to the castle, we see the Fairy King round up the last of his army. He begins his march into the forest, intending on getting his daughters back. In the meantime, Sunny makes it to the castle, gets a potion for himself, and sets off to find Dawn. Marianne and Bog make it to the princess's room, where she fishes out the diary. She claims if she can prove to Dawn that real love is better than the potion, then maybe the spell will break. They return to the kingdom just as the army arrives. Furious, Bog returns Marianne to the dungeon, feeling betrayed by the Armage. Marianne tries to reason that she had no idea this was happening, but Bog doesn't believe her. He sends her to the dungeons. Now in the dungeons, Marianne tries desperately to save Dawn by reading the journal, but nothing is working. She then reaches the end of the pages where she learns her own mother was once under the influence of the potion. This is why she left. Marianne starts to cry, now losing hope. She's never seen true love after all. There's no way to save her sister. A battle begins upstairs, the goblins and the fairies violently slaying one another. During the ruckus, Sunny finds Dawn and opens the potion cap. But he hesitates. He sees the lost look in Dawn's eye and the way she's unresponsive. He doesn't want love like this. He realizes she's a person with her own will and is capable of making her own decisions in regards to who she wants to love. He caps the potion. As the battle continues, Marianne starts telling stories of her parents from the heart. A boutonniere falls from the journal, to which she slides to Dawn through the bars of her cell. Marianne begins to cry. At the fall of her tears, Dawn begins to wake up. It wasn't Dawn that was required to fall in love herself like the original story goes. It's the expression of love from her sister that breaks the curse for good. Dawn, having observed the Bog King so closely during her capture, knows where he hides the spare key. Sunny gets it for them, and they go up to stop the battle. Marianne calls for them to cease their fighting and admits that the Bog King was right all along. They don't need love potions to find true love. Love exists all around them. No one should be tricked into reciprocating feelings for one another. Her parents may not have been in love, but she knows love exists because it was her love for her mother that broke the spell to begin with. Love is real. Bog is moved by this speech and begins to accept it. He recalls the time he spent with Marianne retrieving the false antidote and realizes he is in real love. He confesses his love for her, and she smiles. Finally, after hearing their decree, Sunny takes a breath. He turns to Dawn and confesses his love for her. Dawn doesn't feel the same way. In a strange twist of events, Sunny finds himself okay with this outcome. He put himself out there and was rejected, but at least he will never again wonder, what if? They decide to stay friends, and Sunny knows that that is enough. Once the battle ends, they return to their kingdoms. Bog and Marianne get married and unite the two realms. Love potions are outlawed everywhere, and the two main characters learn what strange magic it is to be in love. Now, is my fix for the movie perfect? Not by a long shot. I came up with the majority of that in an hour by brainstorming with my very good friend who's basically like a brother to me. If I had more time with the idea, like maybe 10 years worth of time, I'm sure I could have come up with something a lot better. The main takeaway I wanted for this rewrite, however, wasn't that love was deserved or owed by anyone. The message of my version is this: everyone is capable of love, and everyone is able to be loved. I like that message a lot more than the original. In making this video, I wanted to try and find a piece of media that contains all of the good elements of strange magic without sacrificing its moral compass to do so. I couldn't find an exact match. Animated retellings of A Midsummer Night's Dream are apparently hard to come by. But I did find a movie similar enough in theory that I would like to take a moment to share. Mune is a French indie movie that came out in 2014 about a faun who becomes the guardian of the moon. Through a series of mistakes, the sun ends up in the clutches of an evil ruler of the underworld, causing the moon to lose its power, and Mune must embark on a quest to save them both. It's a story loosely based on Greek myth, just as Strange Magic is loosely based on Shakespeare, taking inspiration from the stories of Selene and Helios. Mune lives in a world full of wonder. The moon is attached to a giant bird creature, while the sun floats behind a rock giant. The animation is gorgeous, and the character designs are so unique, as well as the universe it takes place in. The visuals take risks in ways that were impressive for the time. There was a point in which the animation switched from 3D to 2D as Mune entered the realm of dreams, which piqued my enjoyment significantly. Most importantly, this movie is an example of love done right. From the beginning, Mune is nothing but respectful toward Glim. He helps her with her restrictions, keeping her safe when she freezes and goes stiff. In the end, although it's rushed, you can watch as the romance blooms in a way that is much more believable than that of Sunny and Dawn. Is this movie perfect by any means? Absolutely not. The story itself is a little weak, and some of the character developments could have been tuned up, but it's still a beautiful movie with a wonderful story to share. If you have the time, give Mune a shot. It's definitely worth your while. Do I think Strange Magic is the worst movie in the world? Not by a long shot. My biggest gripe with movies like these is that there is so much potential wasted on storylines that aren't as well developed as they could be. For this movie to have taken 10 years to be made into a reality, I was expecting a little more from its premise. And yes, although I am 21 years old now, I did watch this movie for the first time many years ago, back when I was the target demographic. I didn't have the capability to express my feelings about Strange Magic back then, but I do now. Strange Magic was a movie that could have been great had it had just taken a different approach on the way it defined growth and love. What did you think about Strange Magic? Was it the true Star Wars for girls in your opinion? How would you improve this movie, if you would at all? Did you end up giving Mune a shot? Let me know in the comments down below. Make sure you subscribe, drop a like if you want, and thank you so much for watching.